Have you ever thought about how assessments aren't just tests, but they're tools for growth? I'm Dr. Megan, and I guide people in growing, learning, and fostering connection. In part one on assessments, we talked about the variety of assessments we use and how they can shape our service delivery. But today, I want to focus on how the assessments we currently use might fall short and what we can do about it to make sure that we're creating the most growth for our learners. Most of us have been taught to use specific assessments, such as the ABLES or the VB MAP. There's nothing specifically wrong with those assessments. They're wonderful tools for specific purposes. However, these assessments are often handed down from supervisor to supervisee, generation after generation, and they don't necessarily currently align with the research in the field on social communication and what we should be focusing on, especially if we're working with autistic children. Here's the issue. Many of the assessments that we use today were developed in a time of great need by incredible humans who were basically documenting the work they were doing clinically and giving folks a way to replicate that work in their own practices. However, they were focused on normativity and setting up skills that would be successful for usually boys in a kindergarten classroom. That was the focus on these are the skills that we need to be teaching to our clients based on the work that was being done back in the late 80s, early 90s, late 90s, and early 2000s. Given the time frame in which these assessments were created, they definitely were not created based on the current research that exists around language development, around what skill sets are needed for best outcomes, especially when it comes to language development. And they were arbitrarily chosen, again, out of almost convenience. Like, these are the things we see children need to have by the age of 5 in order to fit into a mainstream or neurotypical classroom. And that doesn't necessarily align with 2024. It definitely doesn't align with a strength-based approach. And again, it doesn't necessarily align with where the research has gone in the field over the past 40 years. What's more is these assessments typically, again, push the learners toward certain normative standards and don't take into account the dynamic, relational, individualistic nature of language and development. So we're often going to miss so many different wonderful aspects of our clients when we're not holistically looking at them, especially from a strength-based approach. When we use assessments that don't align with the current research, we risk limiting the growth of our clients. And we also are not keeping in line with what's socially valid right now. What are the types of things that clients value and would prefer in their service delivery? We're not necessarily in touch with that if we're using materials that were created for a different context, a different time frame. These tools often focus, again, on these normative list of skills that fit children into boxes instead of recognizing the unique strengths and things that a learner brings to the table as a unique individual that they are, and looking at how can we build on these strengths to teach them to navigate the environment around them. Rather than empowering our clients to communicate in ways that are meaningful to them, we're often putting rigid expectations on them that don't align with who they are. So how can we make changes to improve our assessment process? First, we can reflect on how can we assess in a way that is aligned with the current research on autism and language development, and how can we use a strength-based approach. The peak relational training system is one option out of a few that does align more with the current research, at least from the relational frame theory side of things. There's not a perfect assessment out there yet, but this one at least keeps up with that aspect of language development and could be a good option for making sure we're promoting generative learning. But beyond choosing better assessments, we also need to really reflect on, are we assessing our clients to try to fit them into a box, or are we really trying to understand the unique human in front of us and figure out how we can best support them? Are we supporting growth in ways that honor their individuality, or are we just checking off boxes and patting ourselves on the back for marking off these arbitrary skills that we've taught? So the next step is to do better, with breaking away from these traditional assessments that we've been passing down from generation to generation and really revise our assessment processes, again, to be more strength-based, to align with the current research, and definitely have a relational generative learning focus. In future videos, I will dive in on each of those topics and talk more about our options, especially if you need to continue using the current assessments that you've been trained on. How can we make those align with the current research, be more strength-based, and promote generative learning? So if this information resonates with you, make sure to give me a follow.